It was a spicy weekend. Well, some of it was. Has Alpine figured out Red Bull's trickery? Is Checo Perez a serious title contender, yes or no? And we're going to Miami, but coming to you live from the Simola Hillclimb in Neisner. Let's go racing.
They exist in a world beyond ours. This is Formula One.
This past weekend was the 29th anniversary of one of the most tragic weekends in Formula One history. Not one, but two drivers lost their lives at the San Marino Grand Prix back in 1994. On the Saturday, Roland Ratzenberger lost his life in a free practice session. And on the Sunday, the three-time world champion and regarded as the best by many, many in the world, Ayrton Senna, lost his life. That was this past weekend. It is something that we should never forget and also acknowledge and remember the dangers of motorsport. Coming to you live from the Simola Hillclimb. We are here this weekend. It is the LGR F1 Show with me, Sasha Martinengo, proudly brought to you by Suzuki South Africa and of course the Penta Motor Group. Man, there's a lot of excitement that is happening down here. You can see behind me, it's a flurry of activity. The cars will all be start arriving, and of course over the next 3 days we're going to have some terrific action right here at Simola, and we'll be live streaming the whole event as well. I'll be posting up all of those links for you on my social media pages as well. Besides that, we do have Formula One this weekend, and we're going to Miami. But let's go back to Azerbaijan Grand Prix. And the main race, well, let's say, was a bit meh. Hey, let's be honest. My question is, why was it not as exciting? And I've worked out, and there's maybe a couple of expectations. We have these huge expectations in 2023. We were hoping for a lot more overtaking. Why is it not happening? A couple of things. Well, of course, we always have the teams and the engineers and the drivers, and their genii always seem to come together and put things into different kinds of perspective. Whatever regulations get thrown at the engineers, they seem to manage to find little ways around it and make their cars go even faster. And of course, we have to look at driver accuracy. These are the best drivers in the world. In a street circuit like Azerbaijan, you do sometimes think that people might go into the walls. But if you watch that race closely, I mean, the likes of Checo Perez, Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, going through some of those very tight, tricky corners, 5 and 6, 7 and 8, quite incredible how they were just clipping some of the curves at some stage, but they managed to keep it going on. The second point is you cannot predict Formula One racing or any kind of motor racing for that fact. It is just the nature of the beast. Some days we are going to have unbelievable races, and others, well, they just might not be as flamboyant, as exciting as we would want them to be. In Formula One, we have DRS, and lots of people saying, oh, get rid of DRS, we don't need it, it's artificial. But there's nothing else that is artificial about Formula One. It is pure racing, and if you have a better car than somebody else, more than likely you are going to win. Did the extra 100 meters of the DRS zone affect some of the racing over the weekend? Perhaps it did. But when you have a convoy of cars and most of them are in a DRS train, it is quite difficult for the one to pass the other. And we'll get on to Alpine a little bit later. but they seem to be pretty decent around Baku. But we did have a little bit of spice during the Baku Grand Prix, and of course that was very much between the likes of George Russell and Max Verstappen. By the way, I'd like to know, what did you think of last weekend's sprint race format? It's the first one that we've had this year, slightly different. We didn't have a second free practice session. We had a qualifying session that went into the sprint for the sprint race, and we had a qualifying session on the Friday that would determine the grid for the Sunday. I'd love to know your thoughts as to what you thought of the sprint race format. Most of the drama of the sprint race was between Princess George, according to Max Verstappen, and of course Max Verstappen. Now the comments between the two of them were rather interesting, and some of them quite cutting as well. But it did allow for us to get onto the social media platforms and, well, discuss them. Some of them rather curious as well, as you can see from the screen. Max Verstappen calling George Russell a princess. George Russell coming out and saying, well, I'm here to race and win, and I don't care if you're leading the championships or if you've got two world championship titles to your name. And I get that point. Why should someone like George Russell yield for someone like Max Verstappen if they are in a racing situation? The biggest concern that, well, I wouldn't even say it's a concern, but something that we only saw after the race, and that was post-race, and that was the extent of damage that the Red Bull racing car actually received from what looked like a very tame touch from George Russell. And I think that is what upset Max Verstappen more than anything else. Had it just been a little tires rubbing together, or maybe touching the engine cover, and it didn't destroy his race, perhaps we would have seen a slightly different conversation from Max Verstappen. But Max had a difficult weekend, that is for sure. Now, the other interesting incidents that happened over the weekend was Sergio Perez. Perez won the sprint race. He drove magnificently. We know what happened to Max. He didn't have any answer to that. And of course, it allowed Sergio Perez to be quite dominant in the main race as well. So coming up, we'll look at the main race of Azerbaijan. Ferrari also improved slightly. Stay where you are. Hey, it's Checo again. Yes, Checo Perez, a very, very confident race from Sergio Perez in Baku. Perhaps one of his finest displays of driving, and he beat Max Verstappen fair and square. And that is no mean feat. Of course, Sergio Perez came out as well and said maybe the safety car assisted a little, but whatever Max threw at Checo, he responded and raced brilliantly. But what about Charles Leclerc? He finished third, which is a great improvement for him and of course for Ferrari as well. But prior to the safety car, he was actually 2 seconds ahead of Sergio Perez. it would have been inevitable that the Red Bull would have passed the Ferrari had there been no safety car intervention. But it most probably would have taken a little bit longer. Ferrari very much improved, but the problem is that they still have this issue when it comes to their tyre degradation. Many are saying about Charles Leclerc that his pole position ratio or pole position win ratio is very, very poor. But I must say, once Ferrari get that car fixed up, and if Charles continues the way that he is when it comes to pole positions, I do believe he's going to win many, many races. Just a very interesting statistic here on Charles Leclerc and his pole positions. I love how people find statistics, but Charles is a winner, and when Ferrari's car is sorted out, I can promise you it is really, really going to be something very, very special for him. Now, despite Ferrari bringing very few upgrades to Baku, they were hugely impressive when it came to the race on Sunday and also in the sprint race on Saturday. They seem to have jumped Aston Martin and being slightly ahead of Mercedes. And I must say, this weekend I'm not expecting any big upgrades from any of the teams. But when we go to Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix at Imola, I do believe we might see a change of guard. Might not be everyone attacking Red Bull as yet, but there's definitely going to be some significant changes. Ah, here we go. Sorry, there's an obligatory picture of Eva Green. We'll just look at her for a while. There we go. She's acting in a movie at the moment, The Three Musketeers. Haven't seen it yet, but there we go. That's Eva Green. Thank you, Eva. Very nice. Now, where was I? Ah, Ferrari and Charles Leclerc. Now, Ferrari and the other teams, of course, are still behind Red Bull, but we have to consider that both Red Bulls in Baku were pushing hard, and that, I think, is rather significant. The gap to the other teams has decreased. Maybe not significantly, but it has decreased. And as I said, maybe going to Emilia-Romagna in Imola, we might see a vast improvement from the likes of Mercedes, Aston Martin, as well as Ferrari. For the other teams, Alpine I'll get to a little bit later. And what TF happened here? It was comical, but very, very dangerous. Right towards the end of the Grand Prix, with one lap to go, Esteban Ocon from Alpine hadn't made his pit stop. And for those of us that know, in Formula One, you have to use both compound tires from Pirelli during a race. Alpine decided, let's run as hard as they can on the hard tire. Of course, they were hoping for some kind of safety car intervention. That didn't happen. So on the last lap, they actually had to come in and change their tires. The exuberance of greed by FIA or media accredited people and photographers led to what could have been a very, very nasty accident, with all of these photographers and journalists clamoring down to the Parc Fermé area waiting for the winners to come into the pit lane, whereas Esteban Ocon still actually had to go and change his tires. It could have led to a very, very nasty incident. But it was rather humorous that the FIA actually summoned themselves as to what actually happened. Now, I was listening, and as I'm sure you were, to the race as well. And at most racing circuits, when a car enters into a pit lane, there is some kind of a siren that goes off or a noise that goes off so that people are aware that there is a car entering into the pits. I didn't hear it on the audio at the Grand Prix, and I'm not too sure if it's customary for Formula One to have all of these. However, I think the clerk of the course, or it's something that should be introduced in Formula One, that when cars go into the pits, that there is some kind of a siren that people know. That wouldn't have happened in that regard. Let's move from Ferrari on to Toto Wolff, and I love Toto Wolff. I mean, there's times where I want to wring his neck, but most of the time I have a huge amount of respect, and I think he's just amazing. I've read that he's been awarded a Harvard Fellowship, which I think is quite amazing. So who knows, in his later years he might go and lecture at Harvard School. Toto is an incredibly strong leader. He's outspoken, he's fiercely competitive, and he sometimes puts his foot in his mouth, but most of the times he's more pragmatic about what his team are enduring this season, and of course also last season as well. A few weeks back though, Toto Wolff and Hamilton were extremely vocal about the dominance of Red Bull racing this year, and specifically most probably towards the middle of last year until into this year as well. However, they seem to forget how dominant Mercedes were at one stage. Have a look at this graphic. And as you can see, everyone was lapped by Mercedes besides the top 4 cars. And the 4th car was 1 minute behind. So I don't think Mercedes actually have anything to complain about. Anyway, more on Toto Wolff. After the kerfuffle between George and Max in the sprint race, Toto was very transparent about racing. And I do like this quote. Just shows you that Toto Wolff is a very clever thinker as well and can be incredibly articulate. And don't take everything he says that comes out of his mouth at face value. Most of the times when we get interviews, we don't see the whole thing, or we just get select quotes from them as well. So there we go, that's Toto Wolff. Coming up, we'll talk about Adrian Newey, we've got Alpine, and we look forward to Miami.
But hold on.
Hey, guess who's here? My good friend. This is Colin Hasty. For those of you who don't know, of course everybody knows Colin Hasty. Cole, man, it's quite exciting. We've got Simola Hillclimb coming up starting tomorrow. Are you prepped? Are you ready?
Not really. One can never be really ready, but Sasha, up and down the pit lane, there's alphas for days. It's exciting. Man, I'm going to love it. Sorry for interrupting.
Thank you.
Have a good one.
Go and do some work.
And he's commentating for us, so it's going to be fantastic.
It's going to be brilliant. There we go. Colin Hasty, of course, down here with me. Franco Di Matteo is going to be in my commentary booth with me as well during the course of the next 3 days, of course, for the Simola Hillclimb. Okay, stay where you are. Coming up, we look forward to Miami. Welcome back to the LGR F1 Show, coming to you live from Simola Hillclimb event in Knysna in South Africa. It is one of the most prestigious hill climbs in the world. Oh, it's really going to be terrific, so I'm really looking forward to it as well. Plus, I can tell you that there are 3 Suzuki Swift Sport cars that are also going to be racing up the hill as well. And of course, Suzuki are my sponsors as well. So great to have them, together with the Penta Motor Group as well. Big news, keep your hands off Adrian Newey. Anybody who's tried to sign him, and you can only imagine that everybody wants to sign Adrian Newey, as they have over his whole career. Red Bull have inked him down. No one is going to get Adrian Newey. So any team that thought about that, it's not going to happen. I mentioned right at the beginning of the show, is Sergio Perez a genuine contender for the world title? Jenson Button has come out with an interesting quote that says, if Perez can win in Miami, then he will definitely be a title contender. Listen, we still have a tremendous amount of racing to go. But I think from a psychological point of view, it is another street circuit. We know that Sergio just loves street circuits. If he gets another one over Max, there's definitely going to be some some aggro between those drivers. Are Red Bull playing mind games, or could it be genuine? I'm not entirely sure. This is what Christian Horner thinks about their development and going forward. And really, is it genuine or is it a little bit of psychological warfare? The only way that they have lost is basically some wind tunnel time. So I'm not entirely sure that I'm convinced by what Christian Horner has to say. Now, back to Ferrari. There is no doubt a big mountain Ferrari has to climb in order to challenge the likes of Red Bull in Miami, and it is only one race. They did look better than Mercedes. They did look better than Aston Martin, at least in the hands of Charles Leclerc. Carlos Sainz, a little bit off the pace this past weekend, but we know that the car is fast enough and was faster than the Red Bulls and, of course, than the Aston Martins and the Mercedes cars as well. Fred Vasseur, well, he's not scared to call it as it is. And of course, he's basically saying, we know we are behind and we've got a lot of work to do. I still say, watch out for Imola. Things might change there as well. Now, what have Alpine found? Curious question. Maybe we're right at the top of the show. Really? What are you talking about Alpine? They weren't even in the points in Baku. Yes, they weren't in the points in Baku, but we all know that they did have issues. Pierre Gasly's car went on fire. Esteban Ocon had all sorts of problems. And Ocon started from the pit lane, and we know that he did over 300 kilometers on one set of hard tires. And he was very competitive. There were other cars that could not pass him when his tires were really off and they were in the DRS train. So they definitely have found something, but have they found too much already? And the reason that Ocon started from the pit lane is because they were scared of maybe having an overperforming flaw on their Alpine and perhaps could have been disqualified. So maybe they haven't found Adrian Newey's golden moment. However, they seem to be very, very close. Here is something that we've got to consider. Ocon managed to do 300 kilometers on one set of tires. And this is where it becomes very, very corporate. Do you remember a couple of years ago, Pirelli produced a tire that wore quite quickly and it made for a lot more exciting racing. I'm going back many, many years. The problem is, from a corporate culture, Pirelli sat there and said, whoa, whoa, whoa. People who watch this think Pirelli tires don't work very well. So they said, no, FIA, we want to make tires that fit in with our reputation as a company. And that's exactly what they did, together with negotiations with the teams, with Formula One and the FIA. So it's a very difficult balance for someone like Pirelli to sit and say, well, if we make the tires wear quicker, then our reputation goes, but the sport becomes more exciting. So what do we want as a company, and what does Formula One want as a spectacle? It's a very, very tough one for both organizations to get right. But it was quite amazing that Esteban Ocon managed to do 300 kilometers out of 305 on one set of tires. It is race weekend and the magic of Miami, but this year they will be real water. Yeah, it will be a party. There will be tension, of course, between Max and Sergio, and I think that is going to be the talking point of the weekend, unless somebody comes in to manage to mess up the apple cart. I think the tension is going to be quite electric. This weekend from Pirelli, we have the C2, the C3 and the C4 compounds. But we have a normal race weekend. We do not have the sprint race weekend. Then, of course, we look at the circuit, which is a wonderful, wonderful circuit in Miami, but it is also a street circuit, and anything can happen. So in Azerbaijan, I think a lot of fans were watching the TV and going, oh, you know, we're going to have a safety car. We're going to have a safety car. It happened early in the race. We expected one later in the race. It didn't happen. You cannot predict what is going to happen in Formula One. So don't sit there and think just because it's a circuit, a street circuit, we are going to have a safety car. Let's have a look at the circuit length as well. There we go. It tells you everything that you need to know. And it's only the second year that we're going to Miami. It does feel as though we have been going there for a long time. And then, of course, these are the times that you can watch the Grand Prix this weekend. It goes into the evening, of course, for us as South Africans, but all around the world, of course, the times will adjust as well. Also, join the team. And of course, Fritz the Magnificent is our producer, and he's also going to be helping and conducting everything tomorrow for the Simola Hillclimb. 3 days of wonderful action down here in Knysna, and we'll be giving it to you all on a live stream as well. So make sure you join us. Have an amazing weekend. Enjoy the Miami Grand Prix, and we will chat very, very soon. Let's go racing.